Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another episode of Recent Reads. It's just a series of book reviews. I review 10 books in each video in the order that I read them. It's pretty chill. The books in this video are all fantastic. Like more than half the books in this video I rated 5 stars. It's just a really good lineup of books. These are books that I read from early June to late July. For these books in particular, I was really trying to focus on reading more books by BIPOC authors, particularly by Black authors. I felt like in the past I was more conscious about reading from a diverse pool of authors, and I feel like I stopped thinking so consciously about that. Then when I looked back on what I've read, it wasn't as diverse as I would have liked. That was something that I was trying to be very intentional about. Obviously though, like that's not just something that like for this video, this one time, I want to put effort into reading more diversely, specifically by reading more books by BIPOC authors. Ongoing, like not just in this video, but just like that was kind of the theme of this video. The original intention was to read all books by Black authors, but 2 of the books that I wanted to read got lost in the mail, I think, and didn't arrive. We just first of all acknowledge that my stack of books is beautifully gradient. Like, just look at this color scheme. So the first book that I read and that I wanted to talk about is These Ghosts Are Family by Maisy. This is a family saga. It follows a Jamaican family. What I really liked about this book is that it's not just a family saga where it's like, here's a family, each chapter, new character. There was actually this like really cool setup and concept. So basically, the grandfather of the family reveals, it begins with him revealing that he actually faked his death. He was at work, his friend who he worked with got killed on the job, but the 2 of them were often mistaken for each other. So they thought that he was the one who had died. And so he decides in that moment, you know what, I'm just gonna steal my friend's identity because everyone thinks I'm dead and restart my life. The story kind of follows backstory and also the fallout from that moment. It's very non-linear. It's really cool. It's a really uniquely structured narrative. A lot of the individual chapters have like a really unique structure. It's pretty cool. I first heard about this in a really random place, and I say this because people often ask me, where do you get book recommendations or where do you hear about the books that you read? And I hear about the books that I read from really random places. So a couple years ago, I was in a class and we had a guest speaker. I don't know, he was some dude who worked in publishing. I don't really know exactly what he did. I don't remember. Clearly, his talk wasn't that memorable. He was showing us the website that I also forgot what it's called. It's the website where they list all of the book deals. He was just scrolling through like the recent book deals, and while he was talking, I was just looking at the ones that were on screen. I really wasn't paying attention to this man's talk. One of the books that had, I guess, been sold and like its like little pitch deal write-up, whatever they're called, I don't know anything, was this book. And I remember seeing it there and reading it, and I was like, oh, that seems like something that I would really like. I want to read that. Late last year, I was researching and reading all these articles on like upcoming book releases of 2020. This one came up and I was like, oh my god, it's the book. And I really enjoyed this. It's very intimate and expansive at the same time because it's so formally creative but also ambitious. Structurally, I think this book kind of like blazed its own trail. And it was really creative and I think it was really effective. There's a lot of really unique structure. Like it actually opens with this chapter that's told in second person and it kind of skips and weaves between multiple perspectives. It's really cool. For me, being like a craft nerd who loves like point of view, there were some really exciting uses of point of view and form and structure. I almost felt like this was like the first half of the story, but we didn't really get the second half of the story. The book starts with this reveal that Stanford/Abel had faked his death. Almost all of the book was actually exploring, well, it was exploring the aftermath of him faking his death, but not the aftermath of him revealing he had faked his death. It almost felt like we started with him revealing he has faked his death and most of the book was circling back around to that moment rather than what happened afterwards. I really enjoyed the story that we got, but I kind of felt like there was almost like a second half of the story that we didn't get, so it felt a little unfinished. It's not really the kind of book that I can compare to like any more standard narrative that I've read, because it's very creative and cool. After that, I read a collection. So I picked up Heads of the Colored People by Nafissa Thompson-Spires, and guess what? I loved it. This is probably one of my favorite collections I've read in a really long time. There are a lot of fantastic stories in here. The one that stands out to me the most is the epistolary story that's told in emails, and I normally don't really like epistolary stories. This epistolary story was not only the best epistolary story I've ever read, but it was just one of my favorite stories. It's just fantastic use of form to convey character, conflict, but humor. This book actually has quite a lot of wit in it, and especially that epistolary story was so funny while still being a really complex narrative with complex characters. I was invested in every single story, and that's actually rare. Normally in a collection, there will be like somewhere between like 1 or 2 to maybe even half the stories that just don't click with me. Like I just don't resonate with them for whatever reason. But in this one, I really invested in every single story. There were, you know, a couple that grabbed my attention, slightly less. There was one about like a woman at the DMV. It was probably my least favorite, but it was still good. Like I still liked it. Anyways, yeah, witty, tender, rounded characters that are written complexly in a very short space. If you're looking to pick up a collection, this is my current favorite. So then we have some poetry. We're just doing all the forms in this video. I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood by Tiana Clark. This book is such a fun shape. It's like a square. I adored this book of poetry. I'd actually been in a bit of a poetry slump where I just wasn't really like wanting to read poetry very much. This fixed that. I think what this poetry collection does really effectively is reaches into history and explores Black history while still being like deeply personal and rooted in the narrator's feelings as well. So you get this like simultaneous breadth and depth of the narrator. I need to stop trying to explain why poetry is good, because I can't do it. Oh, I said in my notes, well, okay, past me was smart. She said, the pulse of this book was so vital, I couldn't stop reading. That's a blurb for you. This is one of the books that I'm the most excited to talk about. It's one of my favorite books in this video, and that is saying something because I love all the books in this video. It's Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This is a very quiet novel. We follow a biochem grad student named Wallace doing his PhD at a like Midwestern university, and he's one of, or maybe the only Black student in his cohort. The book follows his life over the course of one weekend, where there's a drastic change in the relationship he has with one of his friends. His father has passed away and he didn't go back for the funeral, and kind of everyone he tells is very like puzzled by this. They don't really understand his decision, and he's also just feeling like subtle but like very deep isolation and is thinking about dropping out of grad school. It's a very quiet, subtle novel. It really looks at like racial dynamics in academia and like specifically the experience of a queer Black man in a PhD program. Time frame is very compressed, but there are still like a lot of threads. First of all, the protagonist Wallace, I can't remember the last time I was so immediately endeared to a character. He's a very tenderly written character. Prose and the writing is impeccable. It's very elegant. It is a very subtle plot line. You know, it's just like a weekend of his life. The writing is so like elegant and lovely to read that I couldn't put this down. It doesn't happen often that I actually can't put a book down, but I couldn't put this book down. I read it in like 2 days. And I think what's so brilliant about this book is that Taylor created a very deep, complex, profound story from a situation that seems very normal. Like, looking at it from the outside, this is just one weekend in the life of one grad student. But he took one weekend in the life of one grad student and added so many layers of complexity that it felt so emotionally gripping. There's a cool article that I read that I will leave a link to. It's an interview with the author. There's just this quote that I wanted to share from a writerly perspective. He said, writing a novel ruins your life in really specific ways, and oh, mood. It's been longlisted for the Man Booker. It's the only book I haven't read any other books from the long list, but God, I hope it wins. Real Life is gonna win the Man Booker. We're manifesting it. It's excellent. Then I read a book by one of my favorite authors, Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Her collection, The Thing Around Your Neck, is my favorite short story collection. I haven't read all of her novels. I read half of Yellow Sun. This is her debut novel. So this book follows a 15-year-old Kambili. She lives a pretty like upper class life in Nigeria, but her home life is not harmonious. Her father is kind of a like oppressive force, has very high expectations of perfection for Kambili, and the story follows her and her brother. They go to stay with their aunt for a period of time, and it's kind of the first time that Kambili has experienced freedom It's basically just like a coming of age story of how this transforms her, and by extension, her home situation. I admire about this book what I have admired in all of her writing that I have read, and it's her ability to create very realistic characters who just have that like spark of empathy in them. Kind of immediately, but very subtly. I often rely on like more extreme characterization, like characters with like really extreme personalities. Whenever I read her work, I'm always really wowed at how she doesn't need strangeness to create very rounded people. She does it very subtly and very carefully. And I've admired that in everything I've ever read of her work. So Kambili, just as like the core, she's the narrator of the story, is just like a really stunningly rendered character. Plus like her prose is just, she has this beautiful style that is vivid and, you know, distinct. Like she has a distinct voice, but it's subtle and economical. It's so clear. It did take me a while to get into. I was invested in the characters right away, but it actually takes a really long time to get to kind of like an inciting incident. So it was a bit of a slower start. The next book is wild. So it's Untold Day and Night by Suah. So this is a wild, fabulous, surrealist fever dream, translated from Korean. It's set over a very short period of time. It's just like one day, and the main character, Ayam, she works at like a sound theater where they put on audio plays in Seoul, and it's the day that the theater is closing. That's kind of where the story begins, and from there we are taken on an insane, strange, dreamy disintegration of reality through a heat wave in Seoul over the next like 30 hours. It's so much more bizarre than I'm making it sound. I don't know how to articulate to you how bizarre this is. So I said, like, there's one point here I said, it feels like multiple realities or planes of consciousness have been folded together and are all existing simultaneously. It's the structure and the pacing of this book and the way that it folds together these recurring images and moments to the point that reality starts to disintegrate. Bizarre. It's very trance-like. I will say, for a bit of shade. So this book was kind of like what I wanted Murakami to be. I read a couple books by Murakami, and the thing that people always say about Murakami is how bizarre and dreamlike his work is, and they say that his work is like reading a dream. Every time I would hear that, I was like, that sounds awesome. Yes, but I never got that. This is what I wanted Murakami to be before I'd ever read Murakami. It has that dreamlike feeling, but it's so vivid but also hazy, and did I understand it perfectly? No, but I loved being along for the ride. I feel like this is very similar to After Dark. It's this very short time frame with this like clash of surrealism, but After Dark ultimately left me just kind of underwhelmed, and this was so much more visceral and entrancing. It's really hard to explain without just reading it. Like what I wrote in my note here, I said, the pacing and structure fold, manipulate, stretch, and compress reality. I've never seen a technique like this before. I've never read a narrative like this before. It's cryptic and weird and startling and just super cool. And I read another book of poetry, Magical Negro by Morgan Parker. This is what I've been wanting to read forever and I just haven't picked it up. I don't know how to describe poetry because clearly I don't know how to describe poetry, because all I wrote in my notes were, I'm dead serious, these are my notes, I'll just read them to you. I said, this was transcendent, this revived me, and so many stellar lines, stellar poems. That isn't very useful. So this book is primarily like a meditation on contemporary Black womanhood, and it's just really good. Her language, her use of poetic form, it's all impeccable. She's very good at like upending your expectation of the line, you know, like thinking the image is going one way, and then she introduces this like curveball kind of surprise. I love this, like there's just so many lines that I'm like, that line is amazing. Like I think about a yellow line and then a road and then an animal, and nothing rises up and horror is a verb. What? It's so good. This line is insane. My body is an argument I did not start. The next book that I read is The Unpassing by Chia-Chia Lin. This book follows a family of Taiwanese immigrants living in Alaska in the 1980s from the perspective of the son, Gavin, who I think he's like 11, 12 at the time the story is taking place, and at the beginning He and his younger baby sister, who's like 2 years old, they both get meningitis, and when Gavin wakes up from a coma and finds out that he had meningitis, he also finds out that his younger sister Ruby did not survive. And it's kind of a portrait of the family over the course of the next year. This was stunning. Gorgeously atmospheric, but the prose is so easy to read, but it's like so atmospheric. The end of this got me. This was like, just like the last page, the last scene was one of the most like perfect endings to a book that I can remember. It's very rare, like it ends on a flashback, but it was just like perfect. It like hurt my heart. It's a very like subtle, delicate, quiet novel. I finished reading the book, and over the next week after I finished this book, pretty much every single day I would just keep thinking about it. And I'd just be like, oh my god, thinking about how good it was. Like, this one really stuck with me. This is one of my favorites. I don't want to pick, but one of my favorites for sure, and it's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine. Evaristo? This was the most quality book I've ever read. Like, I started reading it and I was just like, oh, this is gonna be like some fine wine. This is gonna be some high quality writing. It's not a family saga, but it does have that like structure where every chapter follows a different character. The book is divided into 4 sections with 3 characters in each section, and in each chapter the 3 characters are linked in a more evident way, and then as we traverse the 4 different sections we start to see links appear between the different characters that are maybe less immediately obvious. I've read a lot of books with this type of structure where every chapter follows a different character. There are 12 protagonists, and every single one of them has more depth than in a typical novel with 1 protagonist. Can you say character depth? This book can. This book said character depth. And beyond just the 12 characters, because there are 12 point of view characters, every single chapter, you know, has a lot of side characters. This is a cast of dozens and dozens. Every single character in the book is interesting. No character here is an afterthought. No character, like every single character, I would read a whole novel about. The deeper I got into the book, the more side characters there were where I was disappointed that there wasn't a chapter about them. Someone would be on the page for like 1 paragraph and I'd be like, I need a whole book about that person now. Every single character is so well rendered, like I have never seen before. If you haven't read this book, you might not know, but it is stylistically very interesting. She doesn't use periods. She uses line breaks. Doesn't take long to get used to. Once you get used to, it has a beautiful flow, and it does what poetry does, where you get that emphasis and you get that rhythmic pause every time there's a line break. This is just objectively one of the best books I've ever read. The way that every single point of view doesn't just create depth within itself, but adds these layers to the entire narrative as a whole is genius. So the last book that I read, I'm also really excited to talk about, and it's Washington Black by S.E. Edugyan. This book is a sweeping historical saga. Well, maybe it's not a saga. I don't even know. What is a saga? I don't even know what a saga is. I'm just using words now to sound smart. So we follow the main character. His name is George Washington Black. He just goes by Wash. He's an 11-year-old slave on a sugar plantation in Barbados. It's kind of a complicated setup, but basically ownership of the plantation changes, and the new dude who runs it, I don't know his name, is kind of a bastard, as slave owners tend to be. He sucks. Brother is like a eccentric inventor kind of man, and he's inventing this machine here, like a flight balloon thing. He requests that Wash become his personal assistant because Wash is really small. It ends up on this kind of like huge adventure that traverses several continents, and a lot of people have said that it's kind of like a Jules Verne-esque type of adventure. I haven't read any Jules Verne, so I can't really say, but I think it has that like tonal quality. She used the typical like structure of like an adventure story, but it's a character study, you know, like the book is really about Wash's, it's not just about his journey to freedom, how he navigates that personally. Wash is a really incredible character. He's just one of those rare characters that is just like so memorable and well crafted. I thought he was one of the most well-crafted like narrators that I've read in a really, really long time. And the prose style is also just like delightfully readable. Like, it's really rich in detail, but it's also like really smooth. But what I think that this book did the best, what I think is the most like triumphant aspect of it, was Edugyan's ability to parse and examine sometimes very subtle power dynamics between characters, specifically in the relationship between Wash and Titch, who's the inventor. That's a very complex dynamic. Like, there's so much to unpack in that relationship. She really parsed a lot of like very subtle different angles there. I really love this, and I think it would appeal to like a very wide range of people, because it is on one hand like a really just objectively cool plot, like cool adventure story, but it's very character driven. It's a historical adventure, but I think it would appeal to you even if you don't read historical or adventure. Like, I don't read either of those genres, and I love this because I think she both is writing a really good historical adventure. I think she also is playing with the conventions of that form to do something very specific. Edugyan, I kind of know her. Okay, won't get ahead of myself. We've never had a conversation. She's an alum of my writing program, but I think she's probably like the most successful alum we've ever had. I remember being in my final writing workshop. The professor was like, on the first day, he was like, man, so many great novels have been started in this class, such as Edugyan's first novel. And I was like, oh my god, the footsteps that I walk. Let me know what your favorite books that you've read recently are. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr. I'll see you next time.